You're at rock bottom financially, but you have faith that things are about to change and you will find the biggest gold mine, and the idea you believe in will bring you the wealth you want. These two men were on their way to doing just that, but something didn't go quite as planned. This is Kenny Wells. His father runs the family business, Washoe Mining, a company that Kenny's grandfather started. Every day, Kenny's father wondered if it was time for him to retire, but every time he went to work with unwavering enthusiasm, because his work was his true passion. Unfortunately, that day was the last time Kenny saw him alive. 7 years later, the once thriving Washoe Mining Company was on the verge of collapse. Kenny, already as the company's chairman, desperately presented his mining ideas to investors, but all his attempts were in vain. Even an old friend of his father's, to whom he turned for help, only accepted him through his managers, which was another painful failure. At that time, the economy had undergone dramatic changes, especially in the field of raw materials. By then, Kenny had already lost his home and was living with Kay, his girlfriend. But his spirit never broke. Kenny never stopped dreaming. One day, as he fell asleep, he had a wonderful dream about gold in Indonesia. 6 years earlier, he had been there, and Indonesia had amazed him with its prosperity. At the same time, he heard about Michael Acosta, an extraordinary geologist who discovered the largest copper deposit in Southeast Asia. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie, and Kenny was certainly among them. The whole mining world was talking about Michael and his bold theory of the circle of fire of gold. And now Kenny felt that it was time to find this legendary man. He believed that their partnership would bring him immeasurable wealth. While his wife was sleeping, Kenny carefully pulled out the precious gold watch he had once gifted her. He planned to take it to a pawn shop because he needed the money badly. Kenny was going to follow the call of fortune. He arrived at the meeting with Mike, but as it turned out, all of the geologist's colleagues devalued his theory about gold, considering it false. No one believed Mike. No investor would take such risks. However, Kenny believed, and over the years, he has not forgotten his faith. At the moment, Kenny clearly did not look like a person capable of financing such large-scale projects as gold mining. Mike even called Kenny a psycho, but despite everything, the trip had to happen. The two men set out for Indonesia, sailing by boat through the depths of the jungle, where monkeys and tall plants dominated. It was in this jungle that Mike decided to test Kenny's strength. It was home to the Dayak people, known for their tradition of cutting off heads, although this was rarely done nowadays. Through his fatigue, Kenny suddenly saw the same scene, a scene from his dream. The man felt that it was there that he would find the desired gem. Kenny claimed that all these investors in serious companies were not on their way. Their people were simple enthusiasts, hard workers, just like him and Mike. No matter what, Kenny would find the money for this project, no matter how much it took. So the men signed an agreement written on a simple napkin to split the profits 50-50. It was time to get to work. Kenny set up a makeshift office right in the bar, while Acosta looked for equipment in the city of Kupang. The sum of $264,000 had already been raised. At this stage, the funds were enough to start the process, and the workers in Indonesia got to work. 6 teams worked continuously, with shifts lasting 12 hours. The next day, they were to start searching for samples and then send them to the laboratory. While the men were having dinner, Mike asked what Kenny's tattoo of a bird on his arm meant. It was a poem he had read as a child. A bird with no legs sleeps in the wind. A metaphor for a life spent on the move, constantly searching for freedom and avoiding settling. It symbolizes a life devoted to the pursuit of dreams or ideals, even at the cost of stability and earthly comforts. In the morning, they received bad results from the lab, and they were getting worse every time. In the pouring rain, the workers simply packed up and left. And even worse, Kenny caught malaria, which kills at least 1 million people every year. He didn't want to die with nothing, never having found that gold. Mike went to the locals and explained that they were running out of money, but what could be done to get the workers back? They needed water. Mike had a plan. The local population needed drinking water, and if he brought in water filters, maybe the workers would return. Mike did just that, and people came back. While Kenny almost died of malaria, Mike worked for 2 of them. Waking up in a cold sweat, Kenny asked about the samples in the lab, and it turned out that things were going great. 8 ounces per ton. They had found gold. They now had a gold mine. Kenny knew they would. The friends were extremely happy. Kenny asked his girlfriend Kay to close her eyes, and then showed her a beautiful area with a stunning view in the middle of peaceful nature. He told her about the plans for their house, where the kitchen and playground would be located. The publisher of the popular mining magazine expressed a desire to talk to them. He was interested in their project and wanted to write about it in the magazine. Kenny also invited Clive Coleman to the meeting, who wanted to invest in his project. But it's worth reminding you that at the beginning, it was Coleman's team that didn't believe in his project and sent Kenny home. But now, the cooperation is happening. Kenny agreed to work together. Washoe Mining Corporation was getting off its knees, and Kenny's late father would have been proud. Mike was confident that production would exceed 10 million ounces. Suddenly, Brian Wolf of Brown and Thomas, the New York-based minerals firm, called their new Washoe office. He offered a meeting for Kenny and would even send a plane to pick him up. Mike and Kenny were sitting on the biggest gold bomb of the decade. Clients would want to see a plan for commercial production. The treasure has been found, but history shows that it is not easy to establish production. So Brown and Thomas wanted to help with the extraction, in other words, to intervene in the process. Brian Wolf persuaded, but Kenny was adamant. Mike supported his partner, and they both disagreed to share their gold with anyone else. Neither Brian nor his company understood what they were talking about. They had not been there. They did not experience the price of Indonesian gold.
Put together your institutional players. I would take them on a little trip up the river.
They arranged for their employees to travel to Indonesia for a demonstration. Acosta explained the details of the process to the managers. They made a map of the deep geology, and under guard, the samples were taken by river to independent laboratories. If the seal was damaged, the sample was not accepted. Kenny and Mike showed the men real gold. A few more of these and you'll buy Wall Street. Kenny finally introduced Kay and Mike.
Two of my favorite people in the world.
And Washoe Mining went public on the stock market. On the first day of trading, Washoe Mining stock skyrocketed. At a big dinner after this success, Kay felt uncomfortable. Kay overheard Brian talking about Kenny. She heard people at the bar gossiping that these men despised Kenny and didn't want him to succeed. They were just waiting for him to fail so they could take some of the glory for themselves. She walked over and made it clear with her presence that she had heard everything. Her husband met Rachel Hill from the investment department of Brown and Thomas. This attractive woman was clearly flirting with him, and he didn't mind. At home, he made excuses to his wife. She was angry and said it was all fake, the whole atmosphere. Kenny called her narrow-minded. It was harsh. He said it clearly and concisely, pack your bags and go back to your swamp. He also accused the woman of never believing in his success, that she liked to see him lose. She was sure that those he worked with would tear him apart, and she just walked away. Kenny didn't wait long and already started having fun with that blonde. Mark Hancock is the man who controls more gold than anyone else. He met Kenny and invited him to become a minor shareholder. It was Hancock who had the expertise to deliver the gold. Kenny was perceived as secondary. The terms were as follows. Hancock would get all the glory and Kenny would get his money anyway, but his name and company would not even be mentioned anywhere. Brian Wolf was talking teeth and recommended accepting all of Hancock's terms and swimming in money. Kenny threatened, and his ego was too high to accept the terms. So he turned down $300 million for the right to the name. He didn't want just money, he wanted the name. It was his dream. If you sell your dream, what's left? In Indonesia, things went terribly wrong. The military came. They shut them down and took the mine. Mike was angry, they lost the mine. Kenny had to realize what kind of people they were dealing with. Everything was gone. The company's stock obviously went down. In despair, Kenny got drunk and called Kay. He wanted to build something for their family, something to honor his late father. But she was right, it was all fake. Mike flew from Indonesia to Kenny, who was drunk and lying on the street. A cold shower brought Kenny back to his senses, but it didn't change the fact that everyone already called him a clown and a boozer. Kenny said a lot of unpleasant things to Mike, but the man shared his story. His copper deposit was a stroke of luck. He was looking for bauxite and found copper. These two friends definitely had a plan. They intentionally met the son of the Indonesian president himself, Suharto Jr., but, knowing his frivolous nature, got him drunk for their own purposes. They agreed on 85% of the production for Indonesia, and a modest 15% for Kenny and Mike. But this guy was not so easy. This young man made a condition. If you go into this cage, it will be 85 to 15 for you. In the cage was a tiger, which Kenny petted. These two geniuses made a deal with the Indonesian government. Kenny and Mike were now the only foreign partners in the mining of Indonesian gold, the largest gold mine in history, and would receive 15% of the production. Hancock was out. Although 15% may not sound like much, it is quite a lot out of such a huge amount. So Washoe's stock prices skyrocketed again. The National Association of Geologists wanted to award Kenny. He wanted to go to see Kay, but he saw her at work with another man and changed his mind. Mike helped to tie a bow tie for Kenny. In his speech, Kenny emphasized faith. In the middle of the speech, Mike just walked out of the room. The next morning, the irreparable happened. An independent appraiser could not confirm the gold finds, and people demanded explanations right on the streets. The news explained the difference. The Washoe samples contained river gold, the edges polished by water erosion, while they were supposed to get loose gold, rough. So it was the wrong gold. But wait, Washoe shares were no longer traded on the New York Stock Exchange. That's it. It turns out that Acosta had been gradually dumping the shares all along to enrich himself, knowing that sooner or later the truth would come out. At that point, the FBI came to Kenny. They interrogated him for a long time. wanting to hear his version of events to understand whether he was involved in the scam or really didn't know that Mike was lying. Acosta disappeared with billions of dollars. He was a friend and partner of Kenny's, and although it doesn't justify Kenny, he is apologizing to people publicly. Acosta was arrested in Jakarta by the Indonesian military. After that, his body was found, and it was written that he had fallen from a military helicopter. His hands and face were probably eaten by wild boars, but an autopsy confirmed his identity. The remains were cremated, but billions of dollars are still missing. Kenny recalls the malaria story and the first news about gold back then. Kenny still finds it hard to believe that his friend is a scammer. Kenny was never interested in money. He was interested in gold. What are Kenny's plans now? He was released by the FBI, and he came to Kay with a single rose. It turns out that he had received letters from Mike. There he found their first signed agreement with Mike Acosta and a check for $82 million. His friend had kept his word, and the 50-50 split was realized. Whether his friend was alive or not, he kept his promise and proved that their friendship was not an empty one. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new interesting plots.